Hi, and thank you so much for joining us. My name is Megan Finnerty, and I'm with USA Today, and you're tuning in to a special edition of Just the Facts Live Coronavirus Conversations, in which we're going to unpack the new stimulus bill that just passed last night. Thank you so much for being with us. I'm based in Phoenix. You might hear my kid in the background. He's here, he's 5 months old. And what we're going to talk about right now is our stimulus package that you guys have started to hear about on the 25th, but now it's ready to go, and it's going to be ideally coming into people's direct deposit boxes soon. So I'm just going to get into it right now. It's $1,200 per adult and $500 per child as a direct payment if you've got direct deposit set up with the federal government through your taxes. It's 367 billion into small business assistance, 500 billion into large industries. That's going to be agriculture, manufacturing, airlines, trucking, the whole nine yards. 130 billion into healthcare, hospitals, and doctors. And for those who have filed for unemployment insurance, which right now is more than 3 million of our brothers and sisters, an extra $600 per week over and above what some states include. So there is a ton here to figure out. We are going to bring up some guests. I'm excited to have so many of my colleagues from across the country on. We're going to be covering your most urgent questions about the stimulus package, and I'm going to bring them up now so you can say hi to everybody. We've got Ledge King. He's a USA Today Washington correspondent. Hi, Ledge. Nick Wu is our Now reporter for politics and world news. John Fritzy is a Washington correspondent. And we are thrilled to have Rebecca Dixon, executive director of the National Employment Law Project, on with us today. Hi, everyone.
Hey.
Hello.
Hi, thank you for being with us. So I'm going to cover really briefly, guys. This Coronavirus Conversations is where the USA Today Network leverages the expertise and insights of more than 5,000 journalists to bring you the answers that you need to keep you informed. We want these cameras to bring us closer to you, bring you the ideas and the information that you need to stay informed and keep your family safe, but also to bring you a little bit of comfort and insight, because we know that, these are weird times. And when you're hanging out inside your house just as much as I am, it's nice to see other people who seem to have some good answers to your questions. We're not here to talk over each other, get wonky or weird, and we promise you that, even though I know it sounds like we might when it comes to conversations or the stimulus bill. We're going to keep it real and keep it understandable. So with that, I am excited to bring up Ledge King. Ledge is coming to us from our Washington, D.C. bureau, which he explains is safer than it seems.
Don't worry, America. Nobody's here. It's just me. We're safe. So, and happy. And if I get too wonky, Megan, please reel me back.
Fair enough. Ledge, you've been covering this all week long. Talk to us about what individuals get.
So most individuals making up to $75,000 a year will get $1,200. They're in that group. There's people from Social Security beneficiaries, so older folks, college students who aren't being claimed by their parents. And you can actually make up to $99,000 and still get some benefit. So it's going to affect millions of Americans, and it'll get money to them pretty quickly. The Treasury Secretary has said that he wants the money, or he plans to get the money into bank accounts within 3 weeks. So most by the end of April. And
that is incredible.
It is. I mean,
that's so fast. That's great.
I mean, this whole thing came together so incredibly. As the country knows, a month ago we were living our lives, and now we're doing this.
That's remarkable. I'm going to bring Rebecca on to talk with us about how unemployment is involved in this, as well as this dollar amount. Rebecca, we were talking about how $1,200 seems like a lot of money to just be given overnight, but in the context of running your life, how are people supposed to use this money? Talk to us about that.
Sure. So the $1,200 is not expected to fill in the complete check for what folks are having to pay for rent, mortgage, but it is supposed to help tide them over. And because this is all unprecedented and we don't know how long it's going to last, it will give the government some time to figure out what might need to be in play now.
So this is especially helpful for people who've been able to contact their lenders, their landlords, maybe their credit card companies, and sort of push back payments. This is sort of a bridge amount of money.
Right. And it's part of a compilation of different ways that there is support. So it goes hand in hand with the unemployment insurance benefit for those who've lost their jobs. So that's an extra $600 on top of the average payment of $300 that live in the state. And that's going to be in effect.
That's really powerful. Ledge, when you were talking about, who gets this money, Rebecca, stay with us, so we're still going to keep chatting. We talked about how it's a bunch of this is in addition to unemployment insurance. So if you get unemployment, this doesn't wipe that out. You mentioned if you get Social Security, this is in addition to it. Do you have any insight into how the $600 was arrived at? Is it, I'm sure, a lot of negotiations?
Well, that's right. I mean, there were all of these were negotiations round the clock, and the idea of the money, of the direct payment, as it's called, and the unemployment was we need to get money in people's pockets quickly. We need to stem the tide, and we need to give them cash or some kind of benefit so that because of this virus, they don't either or keep an income stream going. So the 600 was arrived at by mutual consideration by both sides, figuring that this is a reasonable amount of money to at least keep people going for the short term, and they may come back and add to that.
Awesome. Thank you, Ledge. Rebecca, you were talking about how this unemployment coverage has been expanded in part of this bill. Talk to us about who can qualify that isn't always able to.
Sure. So it does also include the pandemic unemployment program, which is going to now make the benefits available to independent contractors, to gig workers, and to the self-employed. And it's modeled after a program that we have that is activated during natural disasters, the disaster insurance.
That's so interesting. So, Rebecca, I want to ask you, I know that a lot of companies like that we're using a lot right now. Maybe some of us are using Uber and Lyft a little less, but probably a lot of people are using Instacart and Postmates a lot more. And those people are considered sort of self-employed gig workers. This is not, you mentioned, this is not recategorizing them, but this is opening up new opportunities for more safety net, more support in the long run, maybe?
Right. It does, I think, recognize that they are a growing part of our labor force, and that precarious nature of their income stream is something that we need to be considering in our safety net and our social insurance program.
Awesome. Thank you so much, both of you. Ledge and Rebecca, if you guys can stay on, we're going to keep talking about this for the rest of this show, but thank you so much for helping us understand what individuals can look forward to. We're going to now go to our colleague, Nick, and he's going to unpack what families get. Thanks for being on, Nick. You are also working from home right now.
I am. You are currently seeing me in the kitchen area of my studio apartment.
Okay. Oh, God, you're in a studio. That's got to be pretty intense right now.
It's a little, it's cozy.
I hear you. I used to live in 430 square feet with my husband, and we both were excited that that was not our case right this minute. It's intense. So, Nick, talk to us about what families can expect to look forward to.
Yeah, so families can really expect double, basically, of what the individual amount is. Married couples or really joint filers on their taxes can get up to $2,400. And then for every child you have, you qualify for $500 on the rebate. All of this, just as with individuals, is scaled based on income. So if you make more than $150,000, it'll decrease by $5 for every $100 you make over that. But you won't get absolutely nothing over a certain amount.
Oh, that's really interesting. You get a lot of insight onto what the federal government thinks average Americans are actually making, because obviously most people are well below the $150,000 threshold for couples, I would.
Right. So pretty much everyone, or not everyone, but like the great majority of people will get some money out of this.
Awesome. So Nick, I'm going to have you stay on, but I'm also going to bring back up Rebecca. She was talking about how these cash payments are great for families right now, but this is sort of like an emergency crisis, right? People are freaking out about how to make sure their children are cared for. Rebecca, you said this is a time when our federal government could really maybe institute some long-term thinking here.
Right. We've had these crises repeatedly. So we've had 9/11, we had the Great Recession, and then we are having lots of disasters that are more intense and coming more quickly. And so it seems that we should take this as an opportunity to figure out how we make these responses automatic and not have to have Congress each time put together a temporary fix.
I think that's really worth mentioning, especially when we were talking about global warming and how natural disasters like floods, forest fires are hurricanes, all these things are coming more frequently. You said there's also big changes. Earlier, we were talking about the duration of benefits located in this, particularly, again, 3 million Americans right now, it'll probably be more next month, applying for unemployment. Talk to us about the duration of benefits and how that helps families.
Sure. So the states have different rules in their unemployment programs. So they range in weeks from 12 weeks all the way up to 28 weeks, with the big majority being 26 weeks of benefits. And so this bill would add an extra 13 weeks of benefits for everyone, which is going to be needed because we don't know how long this is going to last, and we don't know how long it's going to take to get folks back into the jobs once we're given the all clear on the healthcare front.
Thank you for that insight. I'm going to bring back up Nick real quick. Nick, talk to us. I know there was like a ton of back and forth. $500 per child. Is that, I mean, it seems like a good amount of money, but like, what does that even mean? Like $500, okay.
Well, I mean, as Ledge was saying earlier, the $500 amount, as with the individual amount, really ended up being a compromise between both parties. Democrats had originally wanted more, a few $100s more per child. Republicans wanted a slightly lower number, and they ended up coming together somewhere in between. But this isn't going to be the last we see of all these payments. How Republican and Democratic leaders in both the Senate and House have indicated that there will probably be more packages down the line, and there will almost certainly be more haggling over the future amounts of direct payments.
Awesome. Thank you so much for that insight. And I don't want to seem ungrateful. I'm not saying, this is obviously not nothing, but I'm sure there are a ton of parents watching and they're like, $500 is great, but like, do you know what kids cost? And I mean, you guys, thank you so much, Rebecca and Nick. Stay on with us. I'm going to bring on our colleague, John, and he's going to talk to us about small businesses and entrepreneurs.
Hi.
Hi, John. Thank you so much for being on. You're here from home as well?
I am. I've spent most of my time in my basement because in addition to working from home, I have a big construction project going on, which is still happening. So if you see a ladder behind me or hear a saw, that's why.
Man, that sounds super intense. John, we're coming to you to talk about small businesses, which I think my Facebook feed has been super filled with as people are talking about their favorite restaurants, their favorite independent shops, retailers, printings, like everything that gets done in a city. So many of these businesses are locally run, and they really make our cities the places we want to live. So how has the federal government stepped in to support these people?
Yeah, it's a big deal. If you want to restart the economy, you've got to work on small businesses because they represent a huge portion of the economy, obviously. The biggest part of this stimulus for small businesses is a loan program that would be administered by the Small Business Administration. That part of the funding is about $350 billion. It would allow businesses to take out loans for up to $10 million, low interest loans. If they use that money to keep their employees on, then a lot of that money can not have to be paid back, can be forgiven.
That's super. Hey, John, I do want to ask real quick. We have, it says small businesses are fewer than 500 employees. What does that number mean?
Right. So that's the way small businesses are typically defined, less than 500 employees. There was a last minute change in the bill that put it to 500 employees per location. So think about a restaurant chain that has, think about an Italian restaurant chain that's got many different employees in different locations. They'll be able to apply for this money as well as a single shop that you think of as a traditional small business.
That's really, really interesting. Okay, so I'm going to let you get back to, you were saying loans can be forgiven, because I'm like, boy, if you took out a $10 million loan, I mean, that might take forever for a company to pay back. And you're saying most people won't take out $10 million. And for the loans they do take back, they could have a percentage of that forgiven. Talk to us about that.
That's absolutely right. If they do what the government wants these small businesses to do, which is to keep their employees on, to keep their payroll going, to pay mortgages or debt or other things that they need to do to keep the businesses open. And so if they do that, then a portion of this money can be basically forgiven for them. Boy,
I know that money just cannot come fast enough. So Thank you for that insight, John. I'm going to bring everybody else up for just a second, and we are going to talk about big businesses. Now, I know it's small businesses that often have our hearts, and certainly, there we're like, I'm getting takeout half the time with my life, but it's big businesses that are right now often supplying us with the everyday household items that so many of us need. So we're going to talk about the big chunk of money that is going out to specific industries, and I want to start with the one that's most, I think, in our hearts and in our minds. John, talk to us about what's in the stimulus bill for hospitals, doctors, medical organizations.
Sure. So there's a couple of big, top line provisions. One is just a fund, $100 billion fund that can be used by hospitals and healthcare facilities, doctors' offices, and so forth. So that's just money that's going to go out sort of in the form of grants. Another maybe more technical, I don't want to get wonky, but wonkier thing that they're going to do is they're going to change the Medicare reimbursement rate. So, when an older patient or someone on Medicare goes into the doctor, the government pays the hospitals or doctors through Medicare. For patients that are coronavirus positive, they're going to increase the payment by 20%. So that's a pretty significant increase, actually, in the share that docs would get reimbursed. And so those things combined, hospitals alone think they're going to wind up with more than $100 billion in government stimulus money through this package. And the rest of it will go to doctors, nurses, and other healthcare providers.
And that 20% is interesting. I assume it's intended to reflect the increased pressure on actual material goods needed to treat coronavirus. Like people are using their masks and their gowns more frequently. You need to replace all this stuff.
Yeah, that's it. And also, I just think that, the reimbursement rates through Medicare are a huge driver of everybody's health insurance. People don't realize, when Medicare sets a price, that's a price that a lot of us end up paying, not just people on Medicare. The government frequently uses these reimbursement rates in Medicare to sort of incentivize different things in the medical market. And this is a way where they can quickly get money to these places that need it through the reimbursement.
Thank you for that, John. We're going to talk about airlines with Nick. I know probably a lot of us have recently canceled flights, are worried about our upcoming flights. This, the stimulus package can't fix that, but talk to us about what's in it for our airline partners.
Yeah, so as we might have seen, airlines are definitely hurting right now. Lots of people have canceled their flights. My family canceled a vacation that we were supposed to be on this week. And that's all lost revenue for airlines, not to mention all the flights they've had to ground. And routes that they've had to cut back on. So specifically in the stimulus, there's $25 billion in grants for the airlines, just to help pay salaries of staff through all this. And then there's also $25 billion in loans that they can access if they need it, not to mention money for airports, money for the cargo carriers, and other funding available to help the industries that have been, airline industries that have been really hard hit by this. And this was a provision that not only the airlines, but also the flight attendants unions and the pilots unions fought for hard in the bill. And it appears to be they were successful in getting that provision in there.
That is so interesting. I was listening to the news this morning and I heard that my airport, which is Sky Harbor in Phoenix, estimates that traffic will be depressed through 2023, which is staggering to me. And I know, it's unimaginable. So I know they're looking forward to getting this money. John, I want to ask you again, I'm going back to you for some insight onto trucking. I don't think Americans have thought about truckers so much ever, possibly. Talk to us about what's in the stimulus bill for them.
Well, obviously a huge deal. I went to my grocery store this morning and still had a lot of shelves, particularly paper products, canned goods, that were still empty weeks into this. And that has a lot to do with the truckers and the supply chain, the ability to get these products to shelves so that people can buy them. The bill itself actually doesn't do a lot for trucking specifically that I've seen, although it's important to keep in mind that a lot of these trucking companies are small businesses. So a lot of them benefit from the small business provision, the unemployment provisions. But the administration has done some specific things for truckers. They have done things like releasing regulations. So there used to be a waiting period when you got your CDL license before you could get on the road. That's been eliminated. There used to be limits on how many hours you could drive. So most truckers were limited to 11 hours of driving so that they could get rest. Those are gone for a lot of truckers right now. That wasn't done through the stimulus. It was done through President Trump's executive order that he signed declaring a national emergency a few weeks ago. But there are things being done for truckers. One more thing, I'll just note, I talked to a trucking lobbyist this week, and one of the things they're really concerned about is having rest stops open. They need a place to stop and eat when they're driving around the country, and that's a big concern for them. Not addressed specifically in this bill, but again, a lot of those companies will benefit through the business provisions.
Awesome. Thank you for that, John. Ledge, we want to talk to you about agriculture and farmers. I know everyone's thinking about the supply chain and their food safety. Talk to us about what's in the bill for agriculture.
So let me pick up about what is being loaded onto those trucks. Meat, eggs, dairy, vegetables. And the bill has about $9.5 billion for farmers to help them get through the crisis if they have losses. What do they do if they don't have, with all the age of social distancing? Imagine running a huge farm where you have to collect eggs, where you have to milk cows, you have to pick crops, you have to tend sheep, whatever. So there's money to keep these farmers whole, because obviously we need to keep the grocery shelf stocked. So there's money for that, and whether it'll be enough, hard to say. As Nick said, they're likely to come back and provide more money. There's also extra money for inspections, because you want to obviously make sure that what we're eating, since we're going to the grocery store now more than ever, is safe. And there's also extra money for quarantines. If there's a situation where a farm or animals or plants are deemed to be potentially unsafe, there is now extra money to make sure that, because of the virus, there's extra money now to make sure that that people's health is protected.
God, there's so much fine print in this bill. Nick, we're going to close out this section by talking to you and asking you, there's money in this for the arts, which I know might at first sound to Americans a little bit like, okay, but I want to point out, right, have you ever read more, listened to more music, or watched more TV than in the last few? Actually, you guys have been working around the clock, but I think a lot of us are binge watching. So Nick, talk to us about what's in it for the arts.
Yeah, I mean, one of the big effects, of course, of social distancing has been that all the theaters and orchestras and other performing arts groups aren't able to hold any of their shows through all this. They've had to cancel everything, which would normally be large sources of revenue for them, both, of course, in ticket sales and then in the amount they're able to reach out to donors. So it's a smaller amount, but there's still some money in this bill, about $150 million for the National Endowments for the Arts and the Humanities. And this will be for grants to help state and local governments and agencies disperse funding to a lot of arts organizations that have really been hurting through this. There's also $25 million in there for the Kennedy Center, the large performing arts venue here in Washington. And that's at least in part because the employees of the Kennedy Center are all federal employees. So they actually do require a separate federal appropriation to help keep them paid through all of this.
That is really interesting. Rebecca, I'm going to ask you, as you're hearing about how we're stepping in for big businesses, these massive industries employ tons and tons of Americans. What are you hearing that you feel like is going right?
Sure. I feel like the compassion and the willingness to work together that we're seeing in our government and that we're seeing with our neighbors, that all of that is something that I think we should hold on to, and that we need to figure out what is the opening for us to make the structural changes that we need, that make sure that we have an inclusive and comprehensive social safety net, so that when the next crisis happens, we're ready.
I appreciate that. I don't know about you, and I'm asking this question to all of you guys. I know when we started to think about staying home more, one of the first conversations I had with my husband was about our friends who are independent contractors, who might own their own businesses or be people who sort of like string together a bunch of freelance work. And our first thought as a couple was like, these people, how will we support them? Like checking in with them explicitly, seeing like how much savings, not like really being like how much savings do you have, but kind of checking in to be like, how secure do you feel? How can we share our resources? And I feel like this bill is sort of the federal government's effort at that same calculus a lot of us have been having about our friends and family. Like, who are the most vulnerable in our circles, and how can we support them? So I don't know if anybody wanted to comment on that, but it's kind of a nice thing to see from the federal government.
Yeah, I'll jump in. Consider the size of this piece of legislation. At roughly 2+ trillion, it is more than half of what the nation collects in taxes in a whole year. It is a huge piece of legislation, and the reason it's been so supported by Republicans and Democrats is that it does have something for just about everyone. And for a crisis of this magnitude, I think for now, that's the approach that people want to take and do come together. And it is, obviously there's a lot to do about how this bill helps people. But I think the fact that Congress, Republicans and Democrats, who just finished a very partisan impeachment fight, came together very quickly to pass something this tremendous is just amazing.
Well, it does seem like a small bright spot in the mix. Before we wrap up, I wanted to ask, does anybody have anything to add about that? I know you've been reporting on this in real time, and I wanted to ask, does anybody have anything they wanted to add about the bill that you think we haven't covered yet that Americans need to know about?
I just wanted to add that, literally as we speak, the House of Representatives is going to try to vote on this and pass it by what's called a voice vote, which is, going off of what Ledge said about how bipartisan of a moment it is. Voice votes are something that you usually use for really uncontroversial things, like naming a post office or passing a resolution in the House to congratulate a sports team. So it really represents like what a moment we've reached in our nation's politics. That with something like this, people on both sides of the aisle realize how dire of a situation it is and just want to get something out.
Awesome. Thank you for that insight, Nick. Well, I want to thank all of our guests today for being on. You have been thoughtful. You have been fast. We know that, like Nick just mentioned, it's still being, this is still being voted on in real time. So we appreciate everyone's insight and thoughtfulness here. For everyone watching at home, we want you to continue to stay in touch with us at usatoday.com/news/coronavirus. You can also tune in. Our next Coronavirus Conversations is going to be at our regularly scheduled time on Tuesday at 9:30 a.m. Pacific, 12:30 p.m. Eastern. And we look forward to hearing from you guys. Keep sending us messages and notes. USA Today is working hard to be responsive to all of your questions and your needs. And if you want to continue to stay in touch with us on other platforms, you are here possibly through our Facebook page, but you can also check out us on our Instagram. I hope you stay safe this weekend, and we look forward to seeing you again next week. Thank you.
Hey, thanks for watching. If you like this video, check out these other videos from USA Today to stay up to date with all the latest news.